I am a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun.
He's inside the school shooting at the gun!
Well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
After shooting in the theater, I didn't have a plan of whether to die or not.
Hello everyone, welcome to our channel, and happy Halloween to all of you who celebrate it. The fear of strangers handing out contaminated Halloween candy has been around for decades. We've all heard of poison, razor blades, or needles being hidden in sweet treats, and it is a big reason why parents feel the need to examine their kids' Halloween candy before they are allowed to eat it. These fears have little basis, as the idea of contaminated candy is mostly an urban legend. But today's case is an example of when those fears were brought to life in a very heartbreaking way. We chose this case from suggestions, as it fits the Halloween theme. It's a bit different than our normal content, and it is a pretty popular case, so you may have heard of it previously. Nevertheless, we hope that we were able to add some information into our video that you weren't aware of before. Without further ado, let's jump into today's case, which focuses on the O'Brien family. The father of the family, Ronald Clark O'Brien, was born on October 19, 1944, in Houston, Texas. He grew up and spent his entire life in the Houston area. In 1956, when Ronald was 12, his mother passed away. To those who knew him, Ronald's childhood seemed normal otherwise. He regularly attended school and church and did not get into trouble. Ronald grew up and married a woman named Dayneen sometime in the 1960s. After marrying, Ronald and Dayneen moved to Deer Park, Texas, a quiet suburb about 20 minutes away from Houston. Deer Park was known as a safe, family-oriented community, and Ronald and Dayneen seemed to fit in well. The couple went on to have 2 children together. Their son Timothy was born in 1966, while their daughter Elizabeth was born 3 years later, in 1969. Jumping forward a bit, by 1974, Timothy O'Brien was 8 years old, and his younger sister Elizabeth was 5 years old. The O'Brien family's daily life centered around work, school, and church. They attended Second Baptist Church, a large local congregation, where the father, Ronald, was very active in church activities. He served as a deacon, taught a Sunday school class, and sang in the church choir. Ronald also ran a program that used a small bus to pick up neighborhood children and bring them to Sunday school. Because of these activities, Ronald was known, well-liked, and respected at church. Neighbors described Ronald as friendly, helpful, and a caring father. The mother of the family, Dayneen, was known as quiet and devoted to her family. She spent most of her time raising Timothy and Elizabeth, and also helping with church activities. Neighbors saw her as kind and gentle. To the community, the O'Briens seemed to be an ideal suburban family, polite and involved in their neighborhood. Beneath this pleasant family image, the O'Briens faced problems that weren't apparent to those around them all of the time. In the decade before 1974, Ronald had immense trouble keeping a steady job, and it's reported that in those 10 years, Ronald worked for at least 21 different businesses. Some of these jobs included selling insurance or working for a chemical company. By his late 20s, though, Ronald completed his goal of becoming a licensed optician. He felt proud of this profession, as it suited his attention to detail. Ronald found work at Texas State Optical, a vision care company in Houston. But even at this job, Ronald's position was uncertain. He earned about $150 a week, or about $600 a month after taxes, which was a modest income for a family of 4. According to a few things I read, the average income in the United States at that time was anywhere between $900 and $1,000 a month, so the O'Brien family were definitely on the lower end of income. It's reported that nearly all of the money he brought in immediately went to bills, such as housing costs and groceries for the family. Around that time, Ronald's supervisors suspected him of minor theft at work, and he was reportedly close to being fired, like he had been from many of his previous jobs. This was dire, because as we will talk about in just a moment, the O'Briens were in a mountain of debt. Ronald's unstable job history and poor financial decisions didn't help the situation at all. By 1974, Ronald reportedly owed over $100,000, which in today's money would equal over $500,000. This debt was much higher than his salary could support, as again, he only made $150 a week. The money that Ronald owed came from different sources, including bank loans and credit purchases that he could not repay. Ronald was around $2,000 behind on a loan from one finance company and owed another $800 in back taxes to the government. Ronald had also fallen 8 months behind on his car payment of $149. By October of 1974, Ronald received a letter warning that his car would soon be repossessed if he did not catch up on what he owed. The O'Briens had previously owned a home, but chose to sell it to help pay off some debts. They received about $6,000 from the home sale and immediately put the money towards their most urgent bills. It's also reported that the home was in the process of being foreclosed on, which suggests that they were behind on that payment too. After selling the home, the family moved into a rental in Deer Park. Despite this, I read that they continued to struggle and still had a difficult time affording the rent on the family's small income. Ronald began openly talking to coworkers and friends about these financial difficulties. At one point, Ronald asked a coworker to lend him just $100, but they refused. Ronald also applied for a $1,750 loan from the Medical and Dental Service Bureau, a credit company, but this request was denied. These rejections put even more pressure on Ronald. His financial troubles also created stress in his marriage. Dayneen apparently knew their money was tight, though it's reported that she wasn't aware of the extent of the household finances. Dayneen generally trusted Ronald with money, and she mostly focused on caring for the children. If the couple argued about finances, their friends and neighbors were not aware of it. There were no known reports of marital conflicts or abuse. Ronald most likely carried the burden of their debt relatively quietly. Despite these financial troubles, the O'Briens' daily life seemed normal throughout 1974. Friends noticed Ronald continued to appear worried about money, but they did not find this unusual. Ronald began showing more enthusiasm for family activities around this time, as a way of enjoying life, despite financial pressures. He was particularly excited about the quickly approaching Halloween of 1974. Ronald reportedly usually did not show much interest in Halloween, viewing it as mainly a children's holiday. But 2 weeks before Halloween, Ronald bought costumes for Timothy and Elizabeth, and spoke enthusiastically about taking them trick-or-treating. On October 31st, 1974, the night of Halloween, the O'Brien family planned to spend the evening with their friends, the Bates family. The Bates family lived in Pasadena, Texas, close to Deer Park, and attended the same church as the O'Briens. They had 2 children, Mark and Kimberly, who were similar in age to Timothy and Elizabeth O'Brien. The 2 families thought it would be a good idea to go trick-or-treating together that year. Ronald suggested doing so in the Bates family's neighborhood, because it was an upper-middle-class area, which he believed might have better candy than other neighborhoods. That evening, the O'Briens went to the Bates house for dinner. It's reported that Ronald's wife, Dayneen, and the kids arrived before him, and he showed up after work. After dinner, Ronald and Jim Bates took the children trick-or-treating. They originally planned for all 4 children to go out. Timothy, who was 8 and reportedly dressed in a Planet of the Apes costume that year, Elizabeth, who was 5, and the 2 Bates children, Mark and Kimberly. Some sources report that Mark decided not to go with the group, while others state that it was Kimberly who chose to stay back at the house. Nevertheless, the most commonly reported thing is that the 2 O'Brien kids and one of the Bates kids were in the group that night. Daneen stayed at the Bates house with Mrs. Bates to talk and hand out candy to children who came to the door. Ronald, Jim, and the 3 children set off out into the neighborhood around the Bates home. Because it was raining that night, they decided not to venture too far from the house. The kids also had school the next day, which probably influenced their decision to keep the night relatively short. The group decided to mainly stay on 2 nearby streets, Citation Drive and Donerail Drive. Ronald and Jim had a simple system for trick-or-treating. Jim stayed on the sidewalk holding an umbrella, watching the children from a short distance. Ronald walked with the children up to each door, so they could knock and say, "Trick or treat." This way, the children were never left alone at the doors. The evening went smoothly. Despite only hitting 2 streets, they didn't stop at every single house. Still, the homes that they did visit gave out a decent amount of candy, and the children's bags steadily filled up with sweet treats. At one point in the night, the group approached a house at 4112 Donerail Drive, which belonged to a man named Courtney Melvin and his family. The porch light was off, usually signifying that the family was not home or was otherwise not giving out candy. The children still knocked on the door just in case, but unsurprisingly, no one answered. Without wasting too much time, they quickly moved on to the next house. Ronald stayed behind on the porch for a brief moment, but soon after, he caught up with the group again. When Ronald returned, he held 5 large 22-inch Pixie Stix tubes in his hand. Ronald showed the candy to the children, saying something along the lines of, "They must have some rich neighbors. They're giving out expensive treats." Ronald explained to Jim and the children that someone at the dark house eventually opened the door and handed him the 5 Pixie Stix. Ronald said he did not see the person's face, only their hairy arm as they extended it out of the door to give him the candy. Ronald gave 1 Pixie Stix tube to each of the 3 children who were in the group. Because one child had stayed home, Ronald saved one for them. When the group returned to the Bates house later, Ronald gave them the 4th Pixie Stix. Ronald also gave the 5th one to another child who, depending on the source, they either came across while out on the street or who came trick-or-treating at the Bates house later that evening. This child was a 10 or 11-year-old boy named Whitney, who attended their church and whom Ronald recognized. The night eventually ended, and the O'Briens thanked the Bates family before returning home to Deer Park. Timothy and Elizabeth were excited about the candy that they had collected. At home, the children wanted to eat some of it before bed, but likely because it was a school night, Ronald and Daneen told the children they could each pick just 1 piece of candy to eat before going to sleep. According to reports, Timothy chose the large Pixie Stix candy he had received that night. The tube had a staple sealing one end, which was difficult for Timothy to open. Ronald helped Timothy open the tube and loosen the powder that had been packed in the container by rolling the tube between his hands. Timothy then poured some candy into his mouth. Immediately after doing so, Timothy complained that the candy tasted bitter. He had obviously expected it to taste sweet. Timothy told his father, "Oh, Daddy, that's bitter," and clearly did not like the taste. Ronald later stated that he prepared a glass of Kool-Aid for Timothy to remove the bitterness in his mouth. Moments after taking a drink, Timothy immediately began complaining of stomach pain and then became extremely sick. He grabbed his stomach and ran to the bathroom, vomiting uncontrollably. Ronald and Daneen immediately went to help him. Timothy continued to vomit and then began shaking and violently convulsing on the floor. It's reported that Ronald held Timothy, trying to steady him. Timothy's breathing became uneven, and he soon lost consciousness. Ronald later recalled the moment that Timothy went limp in his arms, and his eyes rolled back in his head. A call was desperately placed to 911, and paramedics swiftly arrived at the O'Brien home. When paramedics reached Timothy, he was of course unconscious, an already invisibly critical condition. According to court documents, while Ronald was attempting to explain the situation to paramedics, he himself became ill and had to rush to the bathroom twice. Despite not feeling well, and even after witnessing what happened with his son, Ronald refused treatment. Timothy was quickly placed on a stretcher and was taken to Southmore Hospital, the nearest medical facility. Some sources state that Timothy was declared dead on arrival, while others claim he passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. News about Timothy's death spread fast through Deer Park and Pasadena that night. The fear of poisoned Halloween candy wasn't new, and had been on many parents' minds by this point. The fact that it was now a reality caused immediate panic among local parents. The news spread further, and soon, parents all over the country were tuned in to the tragic news. Parents started checking their children's Halloween candy, or bringing it directly to the police, fearing that their child had also received contaminated sweets. Many took no risks, and simply threw all the candy away immediately. Halloween suddenly changed from a joyful event into a frightening one for families all over. Police officers at the hospital spoke with Ronald and learned that Timothy became sick immediately after eating a Pixie Stix candy from his Halloween bag. Authorities learned that there had been a total of 5 Pixie Stix tubes given to Ronald that night, and immediately became concerned about where the remaining 4 were. Police and local residents assumed someone dangerous had given poisoned candy to trick-or-treaters in order to cause harm to random kids. Authorities did not yet know who was responsible, or exactly how many poisoned pieces of candy there were out there, and their first priority was to find any other contaminated candy before another child ate it. At the hospital, detectives interviewed Ronald O'Brien, who appeared upset and was crying. They asked Ronald if he remembered exactly where the Pixie Stix candy had come from, and Ronald described the general trick-or-treat route in Pasadena. He mentioned a house where someone had given him Pixie Stix after initially not answering the door. Because of the confusion and the shock, Ronald said he could not recall exactly which house or address it was. Police did not press him further at that moment, both because he appeared upset and because they needed to locate the 4 remaining candies quickly. Investigators planned to speak with Ronald again later, but first, they chose to follow the limited information they had about the Pasadena neighborhood. Police officers began searching the neighborhood immediately. They also worked with the Bates family and soon located the 2 Pixie Stix tubes given to the Bates children. Thankfully, neither child had eaten the candy yet. I read that one of the Bates children had tried opening the Pixie Stix earlier, but was unable to remove the staple that sealed it shut. Their parents had also decided it was too late for more candy, which likely saved their lives. The 3rd Pixie Stix was the one Ronald had given to his own daughter Elizabeth, who had thankfully also not eaten hers. Police quickly took Elizabeth's candy tube as well. This left 1 Pixie Stix still unaccounted for, the one Ronald had given to Whitney, the young boy from their church. Around midnight, officers contacted Whitney's family urgently. His parents quickly became alarmed when they realized they had not seen a Pixie Stix candy while checking their son's bag earlier, so they checked again, but still could not find the candy. Terrified, they ran upstairs to Whitney's room, and to their relief, Whitney was asleep, still holding the unopened Pixie Stix in his hand. Whitney had tried to open it earlier, but like the Bates child, could not remove the staple sealing it. Whitney's parents carefully took the Pixie Stix from him and were so relieved that he had not eaten it. By the end of that night, police had recovered all 4 remaining candies that had been given out. It's reported that they turned them over to Harris County Medical Examiner, Dr. Jakimchek, though I don't believe it was immediate. Despite them all being collected, there was still a panic in the area. No one knew if the 5 Pixie Stix were the only contaminated candy. Parents in Deer Park and Pasadena were absolutely terrified. The police forces from both towns began working together immediately to find the source of the poisoned candy and identify who was responsible. With the immediate danger contained for the time being, investigators focused on finding out what substance had killed Timothy and how it ended up in the candy. Even at the hospital, there had been an important clue. Nurses and doctors who tried to save Timothy noticed an unusual odor, similar to bitter almonds, coming from Timothy's breath and vomit. A bitter almond smell is commonly linked to cyanide poisoning, and one medical professional mentioned this observation to the police. The medical examiner, Dr. Jakimchek, was informed while at home that a child had died with an almond-like smell on his breath. Dr. Jakimchek immediately suspected cyanide poisoning, even before tests confirmed it. Timothy's body was examined through an autopsy shortly following his death. Dr. Jakimchek quickly confirmed his suspicions when toxicology tests on Timothy's blood and stomach contents showed lethal levels of potassium cyanide. Timothy's blood contained 0.4 milligrams of cyanide per liter, while as little as 0.2 milligrams per liter is usually deadly according to the court documents. The autopsy officially concluded Timothy O'Brien's cause of death was cyanide poisoning from the candy he ate. While testing the candy itself, they found that each Pixie Stix tube had been carefully opened at one end and then stapled shut. At least in 1974, Pixie Stix tubes were heat-sealed at both ends by the manufacturer, with the company later testifying that staples were never part of the sealing process. According to court records, the remaining powdered candy in the tube that Timothy ate from tested negative for the cyanide. However, it was obviously partially eaten, with the first 4 inches of candy missing. They tested the other 4 tubes, and lo and behold, the first 2 inches of powder in each tube tested positive, and they were able to determine that it had been replaced with pure potassium cyanide. Tests determined each poison tube had enough cyanide to kill at least 3 adults. The fact that there was a section of pure cyanide in the tubes, along with the presence of staples on one end, made it clear that someone had deliberately poisoned the candy. Initially, there was some speculation that Timothy's death was somehow the result of a horrific mistake during the manufacturing process, with many wondering if someone had accidentally mixed cyanide into a large batch of the powdered candy. With these findings, investigators quickly turned the case into a murder investigation. In the days following Timothy's death, police began an intensive investigation to find who was responsible for poisoning the Pixie Stix candy. Police soon learned the only tubes reported in the area were the ones Ronald O'Brien had received during trick-or-treating. This helped police narrow their investigation down. Detectives from Pasadena and Harris County began retracing the trick-or-treat route with Ronald O'Brien. First, Ronald had trouble remembering exactly which house had provided the Pixie Stix candies. The authorities took Ronald to the area, and they walked together door to door along Donerail and Citation Drive. Still, Ronald said he could not remember exactly which house gave him the Pixie Stix. Police interviewed residents at every home on those streets, but none of them claimed that they gave out that kind of candy that night. Most remembered giving out common small candies, or not participating at all. When police asked Ronald again about the house, he still seemed unsure. He pointed generally to different homes, but didn't confidently select one house in particular. Investigators found this lack of certainty unusual, since the group did not go far that Halloween night, and because Ronald was the only adult who claimed to have seen the person giving out the candies. Ronald's uncertainty made it difficult to move forward with the investigation, and they soon found themselves at a standstill. After further questioning, Ronald apparently suddenly remembered a specific house. He pointed directly to the home at 4112 Donerail Drive, owned by Courtney Melvin and his family. Ronald stated that this was definitely the house where he received the Pixie Stix tubes. He described seeing only the person's arm handing him the candies through the partially opened door. Detectives then began an investigation on Melvin's family to confirm Ronald's claim. Police soon discovered that Courtney Melvin was employed as an air traffic controller at Hobby Airport. On Halloween Day, Melvin left for work at 1:30 p.m. and didn't finish his shift until 10:30 p.m., long after Ronald, Jim, and the kids returned home. His work records and more than 200 co-workers confirmed he was at the airport during the entire time that kids were trick-or-treating. Courtney's wife and children told police they had stopped giving out candy around 6:45 p.m. because they ran out early. This was reported to be before the group had even left the Bates house to begin trick-or-treating. After that time, the Melvin family turned off their porch lights and did not answer the door for the rest of the night. The Melvin family stated that even when they were handing out candy that day, they never gave out any pixie sticks, which investigators were able to confirm. Police were forced to consider other possibilities and turned their attention towards none other than Ronald O'Brien. After all, he had been the only known adult to handle the candy that night. They began looking closely into his personal background to better understand the events around Timothy's death. During their investigation, detectives discovered that Ronald had significant and mounting money problems. They learned of all of his debts, which totaled over $100,000. They also learned that Ronald was severely behind on his car payments and that he had to sell the family home to pay bills. Detectives also uncovered that Ronald had recently asked to borrow money from co-workers and had applied unsuccessfully for additional loans. Ronald's co-workers confirmed he had expressed stress over these financial issues in the recent past. Detectives also found out that less than 10 days before Timothy's death, Ronald contacted his credit union to extend his loan payments, stating that he was expecting a large sum of money to come through by the end of 1974. He also apparently mentioned to some friends, including Jim Bates, that he was planning to buy a new home, which confused them, given his financial situation. Apparently, Ronald asked Jim not to tell Daneen about their discussion. At the time, police did not have evidence linking these facts directly to Timothy's death, but noted that Ronald was under considerable financial stress. That was, until detectives discovered something very suspicious. They found out about life insurance policies that Ronald had taken out earlier that year on his two young children, Timothy and Elizabeth. Police confirmed that Ronald purchased multiple life insurance policies starting in January of 1974. Initially, he bought $10,000 policies on each member of the family, which his wife, Daneen, was aware of. Again, she knew their budget was tight and protested against him purchasing these policies, stating that taking them out on their young children was pointless. Ronald then reportedly upped the policies on each child by $20,000 shortly before Halloween, which Daneen was completely unaware of. By October of 1974, the policies totaled around $30,000 for each of his two kids, while Ronald himself did not have significant life insurance coverage. $30,000 in 1974 is equal to around $200,000 today. This piece of information really stuck out to authorities, and the further they looked into Ronald, the more suspicious they became of him. Detectives also found out that Ronald had called his insurance company on the morning following Timothy's death to ask how to collect the life insurance money. Police considered this very unusual given the circumstances. When police spoke with Daneen, she confirmed she was aware of the small original policies, but had not known about the additional larger policies Ronald purchased later. Police were now locked pretty heavily onto Ronald and began looking into any of his actions related to chemicals or poison. They spoke with his co-workers from Texas State Optical, and they told police about an unusual request that Ronald had made at work a few months prior, in August of 1974. According to them, Ronald had asked if the store could buy some cyanide, claiming he needed it to clean gold frames for glasses. The store manager told Ronald this was not possible because cyanide was very dangerous and was no longer used in the optical business. Ronald apparently made the same request again a few weeks later, but was denied once again. Around the same time, Ronald spoke to a friend named Bobby, who he previously worked with at a chemical company. Ronald called Bobby and asked him questions regarding cyanide, claiming that he needed help for a chemistry class that he said he was taking at a local college. Records later showed Ronald was not enrolled in any chemistry class. Ronald asked Bobby several detailed questions about different types of cyanide and how a person could buy it. He also told Bobby that he was curious about how much cyanide could be fatal and how cyanide could be found in a body after death. Bobby thought Ronald's questions were for school and gave him general answers. Bobby also mentioned some chemical companies that sold cyanide, including a company called Curtin Matheson Scientific in Houston. Police learned that someone matching Ronald's description actually visited that exact store shortly before Halloween. A salesperson remembered the man coming into the store and asking about buying cyanide, specifying that he wanted to spend as little money as possible. The man wore a beige lab coat, similar to what Ronald wore at work. The smallest amount of cyanide sold in the store was 5 pounds, but the man reportedly said that that was more cyanide than he needed and left without buying anything. Some sources state that police could not confirm with certainty that the man was Ronald, but others claim that they were sure it was him. Either way, in addition to all of the other things they had recently learned about Ronald, this set off huge alarm bells. Upon further conversation with Ronald's current co-workers, police found out that the questions about cyanide didn't stop when his request for the business to buy some was denied. Co-workers said Ronald had mentioned cyanide several times after that, asking about why it was poisonous and how it worked. Ronald's co-workers found these conversations unusual, but at the time, did not report them to police. According to court records, on Halloween day, Ronald was seen by a customer in the parking lot of his workplace with a stapler, as well as a bag in his hand. Later that day, the customer talked to Ronald, and part of their conversation centered around lethal doses of cyanide. With all of this information piling on, investigators decided to search Ronald's home carefully for any evidence. While they did not find actual potassium cyanide powder in the home, police took a pair of scissors and a kitchen knife from the house. On these items, police found traces of sugar crystals and bits of purple plastic, which reportedly appeared similar to the plastic used for the Pixie Stix tubes. Lab tests could not confirm with complete certainty that these substances matched the candy in tubes, but police kept this information in mind. Ronald also appeared in public shortly after Timothy's death and gave interviews to local news reporters about the tragedy. Additionally, Ronald sang a hymn at church as a tribute to Timothy. He sang the hymn, "Blessed Assurance," slightly changing the lyrics from, "This is my story, this is my song," to, "This is Tim's story, this is Tim's song." Church members were emotional during his performance and felt sympathy for Ronald's loss. While on the subject of Ronald speaking publicly, many of those around him reported that while Ronald seemed heartbroken and distraught in public, he did not act the same way in private. In fact, he quickly began nonchalantly telling friends about his plan for the money he would receive from Timothy's life insurance plan. Jim Bates later testified that Ronald didn't seem too hopeful about the killer being caught, and that Ronald said that he didn't see how they could pin his son's death on anyone in particular. Within days of Timothy's unfortunate death, police were convinced that his father was the killer. They believed that he attempted to poison both of his kids in order to collect insurance money, and that he handed out 3 more fatal candies in order to make it look like it was a random act of violence. On November 5, 1974, police decided they had enough information to take further action. Ronald Clark O'Brien was arrested and charged with Timothy's murder and the attempted poisoning of the other children. Authorities announced publicly that Ronald had become their main suspect. Ronald immediately stated he was innocent and strongly denied harming his son. Ronald insisted someone else poisoned the candy in order to harm kids that were trick-or-treating. Though they were sure Ronald was the culprit, authorities were never able to track down where the cyanide was purchased from. His friends and neighbors were shocked by his arrest, and initially, they found it hard to believe Ronald was responsible. Many people who had comforted Ronald after Timothy's death now felt confused and uncertain. The Bates family, in particular, struggled to understand how their trusted friend could be accused of such a horrific crime. After Ronald's arrest, his wife, Daneen, cooperated with police and provided information about their finances and Ronald's recent actions. Daneen denied that Timothy chose to eat the pixie sticks on his own, and she told authorities that Ronald had encouraged Timothy to choose that particular candy on the evening of his death, though at the time she believed it was simply Ronald allowing Timothy to enjoy his favorite treat. Ronald was placed in jail awaiting trial. The media focused on the case, referring to Ronald as the Candy Man and the man who killed Halloween. These nicknames spread fast, and Ronald's arrest became widely known. Authorities continued to reassure the public that all of the remaining pixie sticks had been recovered, that no other poisoned candies had been reported, and that parents could relax. Ronald Clark O'Brien's trial began on May 5, 1975, in Houston, Texas. The case had attracted significant attention from the media even before the trial started. Due to the media coverage, choosing a jury was difficult because many potential jurors had already heard about the case and formed opinions. Eventually, after careful questioning, a jury of 10 men and 2 women was selected. Ronald O'Brien pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense lawyer was Marvin Teague, a well-known and reportedly legendary criminal defense attorney from Houston. The prosecution team was led by Mike Hinton, an assistant district attorney from Harris County, and assisted by another prosecutor named Vic Driscoll. During opening statements, prosecutors explained their theory. They told jurors that Ronald faced serious financial problems and had purchased life insurance policies for his children, which provided a motive for the murder. Prosecutors also explained that Ronald had spoken about and tried to obtain cyanide before Halloween, and that he was the only adult known to handle the Pixie Stix candies given to the children. The defense countered by arguing Ronald was innocent and that prosecutors had not provided direct evidence against him. The defense suggested another person might have poisoned the candy, claiming police rushed to judgment without properly considering other possibilities. Harris County Medical Examiner Dr. Joseph Jakimchek explained the autopsy results and described the deadly effects of cyanide. Prosecutors showed the Pixie Stix tubes recovered by police, explaining the tubes had been opened and resealed with staples. A chemist testified that the candy Timothy ate contained enough cyanide to kill 2 adults, and the other tubes contained even higher amounts, enough to kill 3 or 4 adults each. This evidence demonstrated the poisoning was deliberate and not accidental. Prosecutors also presented witness testimony for additional context, including statements from friends and co-workers whom Ronald had spoken with about cyanide in the time before his son Timothy's death. They also spoke about the scissors and knife taken from the home and how they had substances on them consistent with the Pixie Stix tubes. The prosecution asked jurors to carefully consider Ronald's financial details, as well as his inconsistent statements during the initial investigation. Defense attorney Marvin Teague argued prosecutors had not presented direct proof that Ronald poisoned the candy. Teague pointed out that nobody actually saw Ronald acquire the cyanide or contaminate the candy. He suggested another unknown person could have poisoned the candy and argued police did not fully investigate other possibilities. The defense emphasized Ronald's history as a devoted father with no prior violent behavior and virtually no criminal record to speak of. Teague suggested Ronald's behavior after Timothy's death reflected grief rather than guilt. He reminded jurors fears of Halloween candy poisoning had existed long before this incident, suggesting the O'Brien family had become victims of unfortunate circumstances. After both sides finished presenting evidence, the jury began deliberating to reach a verdict. Because of how emotional the case had been, some expected a long deliberation. However, the jury did not need much time to reach a decision. They deliberated for only 46 minutes before returning to the courtroom. On June 3, 1975, the jury announced the verdict. Ronald Clark O'Brien was found guilty on all charges, including 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. Next came the punishment phase of the trial. Prosecutors argued strongly for the death penalty, and they reminded the jury that Timothy's death was especially disturbing, as it involved a father and his own child, as well as other children whose lives were carelessly put in danger. The prosecutors also argued that Ronald's behavior following the murder showed a lack of regret, making him untrustworthy and unsafe to society. The defense lawyer argued that putting Ronald in prison for life would be enough punishment and would protect the public. He reminded jurors that the death penalty could not bring Timothy back. The jury spent about 71 minutes considering the punishment. Upon their return, they announced that Ronald O'Brien would be sentenced to death for Timothy's murder. After the trial, Ronald O'Brien was sent to death row at the Ellis Unit Prison in Huntsville, Texas. Shortly after the trial concluded, Ronald's wife Dayneen filed for divorce. In the years following the trial, Dayneen remarried, and her new husband eventually adopted their young daughter Elizabeth. The family changed Elizabeth's last name to distance themselves further from Ronald. Dayneen released a short statement through her lawyer, explaining she preferred to focus on remembering Timothy's life rather than his death. Afterward, she and her daughter lived quiet lives away from public attention. Ronald O'Brien's death sentence led to a long series of appeals and delays, which is common in death penalty cases. Despite these many attempts, his sentence was upheld. Ronald's execution date was rescheduled several times during the early 1980s because of the many appeals. A final execution date was set for March 31, 1984. By this time, Texas was fully using lethal injection for executions. Shortly before his scheduled execution date, Ronald's lawyers filed one final appeal. They argued that lethal injection was an untested execution method and possibly cruel. Ronald also wrote a letter to the judge, desperate for a stay of execution. In part of the letter, Ronald wrote, "I do not want to die." You can pause the video if you'd like to read the whole thing. Later that same day, on March 28th, a federal judge rejected this final argument, and Ronald's execution proceeded as planned. On the evening of March 31st, 1984, Ronald was offered the customary last meal. He made a large request, asking for a T-bone steak, cooked medium or well done, French fries with ketchup, corn, peas, a salad with tomato, eggs, and French dressing, rolls, saltine crackers, iced tea, and Boston cream pie for dessert. Prison staff prepared this meal for him, but Ronald did not eat very much of it. Just before being executed, Ronald was asked if he had any final words. He had prepared a written statement, which he read aloud. In his final statement, Ronald continued to insist he was innocent and claimed the execution was unjust. He stated, "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. However, we as human beings do make mistakes and errors. This execution is one of those wrongs, yet doesn't mean our whole system of justice is wrong. Therefore, I would forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death. Also, to anyone I have offended in any way during my 39 years, I pray and ask your forgiveness, just as I forgive anyone who offended me in any way. And I pray and ask God's forgiveness for all of us respectively as human beings. To my loved ones, I extend my undying love. To those close to me, know in your hearts I love you one and all. God bless you all, and may God's best blessings be always yours. Ronald C. O'Brien. P.S. During my time here, I have been treated well by all TDC personnel. Ronald did not mention Timothy's name or acknowledge his death in any way. Shortly after this, prison staff administered the lethal drugs. A few minutes later, Ronald was pronounced dead. He was 39 years old at the time of execution. Outside the prison, about 300 people gathered, with many of them there to support the execution. Some supporters even wore Halloween costumes. When the execution was announced, some people in the crowd cheered and shouted, "Trick or treat!" Others threw candy into the air and toward anti-death penalty protesters who had gathered. The Timothy O'Brien case has had lasting effects on how Americans celebrate Halloween. Since Timothy's death, there have been no confirmed cases that I saw of strangers randomly poisoning Halloween candy in the United States. But that doesn't stop parents from worrying and taking precautions. In Deer Park and Pasadena, people who lived through the events of 1974 have never forgotten about young Timothy. Some local schools and churches have set up small scholarships or memorial funds in Timothy's memory. As always, we want to dedicate this video to the memory of the victim. Sadly, Timothy's life was taken by none other than one of the people he was supposed to trust most in this world. Not much information is available regarding young Timothy, other than he was born on April 5th, 1966, and was just 8 years old at the time of his unfortunate death. And with that, we wanted to thank you all for sticking around until the end. Hopefully you learned something new about this case. As always, we'd like to extend a special thank you to all of our amazing members. Your guys' added support means the world to us. Please consider joining if you'd like, and please leave a like and comment on this video. We always enjoy reading them. We hope you guys have an amazing Halloween, filled with joy and excitement. Until next time, stay safe, and we'll see you later.